Hello, this is John C.A. Manley. I'm not a knight. I'm actually a Canadian, pretending to be a knight in this picture, which was taken at Castle Loevestein, I guess Loevestein, um, which is located in the southern part of the Netherlands. And I just want to share with you some photos from our adventures there. Starting with this aerial one, which is actually not my own photo, so you can see where it's situated on the river. Up close, um, surrounded by a moat, and you can't quite see it on the side of here, but from many of these walls they are actually latrines dropping down the side into the moat. So the moat was actually probably filled with sewage water, which is not too pleasant. Here is myself, my lovely Dutch wife, and my son, who actually kind of looks Dutch, but he's not. And Castle Loevestein in the background with a picnic table to the left, which probably didn't exist back in the 1500s. Now here's the hero of Castle Loevestein, Hugo de Groot. Hugo de Groot has been called probably the greatest scholar in Dutch history. He was a philosopher, he was a thinker, and he laid the foundation for what people now call international law, which at that time had a lot to do with matters of what happened at open sea. He was born in 1583, but by the age of 8 he could already speak Latin and Greek, and I assume he could also speak Dutch or some derivative of Dutch. Well, actually Dutch would be a derivative of whatever he was speaking then. So he could speak at least 3 languages, 2 of which were dead. By 11 years old he was already a student and studying at Leiden University, where he went on to write 3 great works, which became very well known across Europe. But he also played a major role in the Dutch revolt against the Spanish. Because at that time the Spanish Empire was ruling over all the land. Not that they had invaded, they sort of just did it kind of politically until eventually the Dutch people realized they had kind of given their country to the Spanish. Now, Hugo de Groot had an issue with King Philip II. King Philip II wasn't particularly liberal when it came to religion. He was very much into prosecuting anyone who did not agree with Catholicism. He was known to have arrested up to, I think it was 9,000 Protestants, and of those 9,000, he killed 1,000 of them. They were just executed. I'm not sure if that was a random execution where he just, lined them all up and stabbed one at every 10 Protestant, or they were put through a trial and decided their religious views were particularly heinous and deserved execution in the name of God. Now, Hugo de Groot had drafted several texts which has been called the ideology of religious tolerance, and King Philip II was not very tolerant of his ideas regarding religious tolerance, because Hugo de Groot felt, well, if everyone has a conscience, which was sort of like the voice of God in their head, they didn't really need a church telling them what to do at a macro and micro level of everything they did in their life. So he very much believed that human beings were capable of spontaneous order and didn't need a religious authority figure above them controlling their lives. Well, that wasn't very popular, so, well, actually, that might have been very popular, but it wasn't very popular with those who were busy exercising religious authority, and so they had Hugo arrested. And by 1619, he was transferred to Slot Loevestein. So they marched him probably across a bridge like this, probably not the same bridge since this is made of wood, and I doubt it's the same bridge, but something like this, and it may have been a drawbridge which went up and down, in which case it was probably up after he went in. He wasn't the only prisoner in here. This whole castle was primarily used for holding political and religious prisoners. So he actually only had a very small room in the castle, which he shared with his wife and maidservant. His wife and maidservant were not arrested, but they volunteered to join him, which was rather nice of them. Just to show you the surroundings, I mean, when they did look out a window, it was pleasant, and at least in the summertime. This is the moat. Actually, this is part of the river that's going around the castle. So they had a river going around the castle, and then they had a moat, and then the castle. The river was probably smelt much better than the moat. Here are some of the sheep that were around the castle. I don't know if these are the great-great-great-grand sheep of the original sheep that were there when Hugo de Groot was looking out the window at the sheep around his castle, but nonetheless they're probably very similar. This is one of the windows that Hugo de Groot might have been looking through, except of course they didn't have glass back then. The windows, as I understood, were just either open or closed, and during the winter they had no heat in the whole castle, so they probably kept them closed a lot. They did have heat apparently in the room of the person running the castle, the family who was in charge of managing all the prisoners. It was also used as a place to store supplies for the army. The army actually lived in barracks around the castle. This is me and my son sitting by one of the windows. We had got bored of just looking out the window at the moat, so we tried looking the other direction, and my wife took this picture. Once we got bored of looking in that direction, we started trying on some of the armor. This is a breastplate. Apparently, they had probably hundreds and hundreds of these stored in the castle. Here is me with a helmet. Here is me with a helmet and a sword, pretending like I know what I'm doing. And now we get to the escape story. So Hugo de Groot was imprisoned in this room, and to help time fly, and because he was a scholar, and because he could read in Greek and Latin, and I assume Dutch, the soldiers would bring him books, and they'd bring it in a book box, like this one. And originally they were very thorough about making sure when he was done with the books and they sent them back that they actually looked in the book box to make sure that maybe there wasn't a prisoner in there trying to escape, which is exactly what happened. Hugo de Groot's wife, possibly getting tired of living in the same room with him with never being allowed to go outside, started training him to spend more and more time in the book box, hours and hours and hours, and I guess trying to find a comfortable position with the lid closed, which I couldn't do here because they had a rope keeping it open, until he could endure quite a long time in the book box. And then when the soldiers came, they took him out in the book box. The soldiers were too lazy to look in the book box to make sure there wasn't a human in there, and he was very good at not making a sound. And yes, this is probably the position he took, because this is the only position I could find that would allow me to fit in the box, unless Hugo de Groot was bigger, or no, smaller, but he was Dutch, so he was probably taller. So they took him out, and he eventually was able to flee all the way to Paris, where the King of France gave him amnesty, and he actually, I believe he was able to later on return to the Netherlands, which he was kind of happy about, because for some reason he preferred the Netherlands over France after all they did to him. But I believe he was still working for the French government, and sadly died in a maritime accident years later. But he was a free man up to that point. And then finally, here's a scene from the kitchen, where I dropped by to partake of some very dry food, which was completely unedible. And here we are on the outside, having completed our tour in the rather cold castle. I was verily underdressed with just that hoodie on, but I survived, and it kind of gave more that authentic medieval winter castle feel, damp and cold. But in the summertime it looks like a rather lovely place, and was probably nice and warm, possibly too warm. Anyways, that's my experience with my family at Castle Loevestein. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to get more videos like this, or receive my Blazing Pinecone email newsletter, where I focus principally on fiction, philosophy, and freedom, head over to blazingpinecone.com/subscribe, and when you sign up you'll automatically get free sample copies of my novels, which I think you may enjoy, in both ebook and audiobook format. So till then, de doei, as they say in the Netherlands.